Everybody had the same thing. What's really interesting is how do you talk to a victim? It was kind of like they were some group that you needed special skills to do. And I thought, here are these FBI agents that go out and interview, killers and all of that, and they seemed a little bit timid.
A pacemaker, a 2-minute window, and a car on a dark road at 2:36 in the morning. That's where we're starting today. Because what just surfaced in the Nancy Guthrie investigation might be the most significant piece of evidence we've seen yet. And the shocking part? Law enforcement didn't even have it until a news outlet handed it to them. If you're new here, hit subscribe right now. Because this case moves fast, and I'm covering every single development as it breaks. Drop a comment below and tell me. Do you think this new evidence changes everything? Or is it another dead end? Let me know where you're watching from. People from all over the world are following this case, and I want to hear from you. Now let's get into it. Because this timeline needs to be laid out carefully. Because once you see it, you'll understand exactly why investigators should have been looking at this weeks ago. February 1st, the early hours of the morning. Most of the neighborhood is asleep. But at 2:28 a.m., something happens that we know is significant. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker, a medical device synced to her phone, disconnects, goes offline. That's not nothing. That's a data point, a hard timestamp, a moment that something, somewhere, changed. Now hold that number in your head. 2:28 a.m. 8 minutes later, 8 minutes, a Ring camera mounted on a private home approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's house picks up a car moving through the neighborhood. 2:36 a.m. The route this car is traveling? It maps cleanly as a way to leave the area while avoiding the main roads entirely. Does that mean this car is connected to Nancy's disappearance? Not necessarily. It could be completely innocent. A night shift worker, someone coming home late. But the timing, and I want to be precise here, is the kind of timing that investigators do not get to ignore. 7 minutes. That's roughly the drive time between Nancy's house and where that camera sits. Pacemaker disconnects at 2:28. Car appears at 2:36. 7-minute drive. You do the math. Here's where it gets even more troubling. The family that owns that Ring camera? They say nobody from the Pima County Sheriff's Office ever knocked on their door. Not in 26 days. The FBI never reached out either. It wasn't law enforcement that obtained this footage. It was a journalist. A reporter who then had to send the video to the FBI and the Sheriff's Office himself. Think about that for a moment. Think about how many times over the past month we've heard about search teams, about law enforcement personnel in the hundreds combing through the area, about the resources being poured into this investigation. And yet, a camera sitting 2.5 miles from the scene, on a route that a person leaving that neighborhood might logically take, went untouched. Now I want to be fair here, because this is complicated. When an investigation is this large, when you're dealing with potentially thousands of hours of Ring camera footage across an entire region, there is a real logistical problem. You can't knock on every door in a 50-mile radius. Resources have limits. Manpower has limits. But here's the counter-argument, and it's a strong one. Investigators knew something specific very early in this case. They had a time window, and they knew Nancy's pacemaker went offline at 2:28 a.m. on February 1st. That's not vague. That's not a wide-open timeline. That is a precise, documented medical data point. With that in hand, any investigator worth their badge should have drawn a perimeter around that timestamp and worked outward systematically. Not geographically, but chronologically. Every camera within driving distance of Nancy's house checked the footage between roughly 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. That's it. That's the strategy that could have surfaced this car weeks ago. Instead, by the time this video entered the investigation, it got there because a reporter knocked on a door that law enforcement never knocked on. Now stay with me, because I want to take a step back and look at the bigger picture of where this investigation stands right now. Because there have been some other significant developments in the last 48 hours that tell us something important about where things are headed. At Nancy's house, the house where she was last seen, the house that has essentially been a focal point of this entire investigation, there was new activity. Contractors arrived, not investigators, not detectives, contractors, and they were installing new surveillance cameras around the property. Why does that matter? Because it suggests that the house is being prepared to be returned to the Guthrie family. After 26 days, it appears law enforcement is wrapping up whatever processing they still needed to do at the scene. A homicide detective and prosecutors were there just the day before, walking the exterior, walking the interior. What looks, in hindsight, like a final walkthrough before the scene is released. Now you might be wondering, does that mean they've found everything they're going to find? Does releasing the house back to the family signal that investigators have given up or run out of leads? Not necessarily. Crime scenes get released. That's standard procedure. Doesn't mean the investigation is over. But it does mark a transition. From active scene processing to a broader, outward-facing investigation. Leads, tips, surveillance footage, informants. That's where this case lives now. And speaking of tips, there is a $1 million reward currently on the table for information leading to Nancy's whereabouts or the identification of whoever is responsible. $1 million. That number matters. Because if this case hinges on someone talking, someone who knows something, someone who was there, someone who has been staying quiet, that kind of money has a way of loosening lips. Here's the question I keep coming back to, though. Who would be in a position to talk? What does the suspect profile actually look like at this point? Let's think through what we actually know, not theories, not speculation, but documented facts. A man was seen on the porch of Nancy's house on the night she disappeared. The video is grainy but clear enough to establish his presence. He appeared to be carrying a backpack. His behavior on that porch, hesitant, somewhat clumsy, checking the camera, did not look like the movements of a professional. Not a trained operative. Not someone who had done this many times before. There's also a separate image, and believed by some sources to potentially be from a different date, possibly weeks earlier, showing a similar figure near the property. If that's accurate, if someone was scoping out that house long before the night of February 1st, then this wasn't impulsive. This was planned, at least to some degree. But planned for what? That's the question that splits every theory wide open. If this was a targeted kidnapping, someone who knew who Nancy was, who knew she was Savannah Guthrie's mother, and who took her as leverage or for profit, then where are the demands? Where is the communication? Nearly 4 weeks in, no credible ransom note has emerged. Every contact that's been made claiming to have Nancy has fallen apart under scrutiny because no one could provide proof of life. None. Zero. Not a photo, not a voice message. Not a single verifiable detail that only someone holding Nancy could know. That silence is deafening, and it points away from a calculated kidnapping for ransom scenario almost entirely. So if it wasn't a targeted kidnapping for profit, what was it? The theory that has gained the most traction among investigators and analysts is this: a burglary gone wrong. Someone who cased the house, possibly watching, possibly seeing an elderly woman living alone, who believed the home was unoccupied on the night they chose to enter, who had no idea who Nancy Guthrie was, who had no idea that her daughter was one of the most recognizable faces on morning television, who walked into that house looking for jewelry, for valuables, for anything easily carried and quickly sold. And then something went wrong. Maybe Nancy woke up. Maybe she confronted whoever was in her home. Maybe there was a struggle. Maybe she had a medical episode. We don't know. What we do know is that her pacemaker disconnected at 2:28 a.m. And whatever happened in that house in those 42 minutes where her doorbell camera was offline and dark, that's the window. That's where the truth is buried. And if what happened in those 42 minutes was an accident, if this person never intended for anyone to get hurt, then the silence starts to make sense in a different, much more frightening way. Because if you're a panicked amateur burglar who suddenly finds yourself in the middle of something catastrophic, your instinct isn't to call 911. Your instinct is to make the problem disappear. That would explain why Nancy was removed from the house. Not because someone had a plan for her, but because someone needed to eliminate the evidence of what happened. I want to pause here for a second and ask you something directly. Because I think about this a lot when I cover cases like this. Does this feel like the kind of case that gets solved? Or does this feel like the kind of case that haunts us for years? Drop your honest answer in the comments. I really want to know what you think. Because here's the uncomfortable statistical reality. At any given moment in the United States alone, tens of thousands of adults and children are listed as missing. Cases with no resolution, no body recovered, no suspect charged. The resources, the attention, the public pressure. None of it is a guarantee of answers. We want to believe that with enough effort, every case gets solved. But the truth is more complicated than that. What gives me some hope in this case, and I want to be honest, it's fragile hope, is that tip lines and reward money do work. They work because they put pressure on the people closest to a suspect. The girlfriend who noticed something. The roommate who asked a question and got an evasive answer. The friend who was supposed to meet up on the night of February 1st and couldn't get a call back. If there's even one person out there who has a piece of this puzzle and hasn't yet come forward, $1 million is a powerful argument for picking up the phone. And now there's this new surveillance footage in the mix. A car on a dark road at 2:36 in the morning. A route that avoids the main streets. A timestamp that lines up with the last moment Nancy's medical device showed any activity. Is it the breakthrough? We don't know yet. Will law enforcement confirm whether this vehicle is significant to their investigation? They haven't said. But the fact that this footage exists, that it was sitting in a Ring camera archive for nearly a month while investigators never came to retrieve it, that tells its own story about how this investigation has been conducted. There's also the question of what happens next with the Guthrie family. Savannah Guthrie has been a constant presence in this story. Public-facing, composed under circumstances that would break most people. Carefully choosing her words in every video she's released. There are reports that she may be returning to New York soon. She has young children. She has a life and a career that have been suspended for the better part of a month. And honestly, that decision, if she makes it, doesn't signal giving up. It signals something that's actually very human and very understandable. At a certain point, you have done everything within your power. You've spoken publicly. You've offered a reward. You've cooperated with investigators. You've sat near your mother's house and waited. And at some point, the waiting has to shift, not because hope is gone, but because life has to continue alongside the grief. Savannah said something recently that stuck with me. She talked about blowing on embers. keeping the spark alive even when the flame is invisible. That's where this case is right now. The embers are still there. The question is, what finally makes them catch? For the people watching this, if you live in the Tucson area, if you were on the roads in the early hours of February 1st, if you have a Ring camera or a doorbell cam or any kind of exterior surveillance and you haven't been contacted by investigators, please check your footage. Please check specifically around the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. window on February 1st. You may be sitting on something you don't even know is significant. And if you know something, anything, there is $1 million reward and there is a family that deserves answers. This is day 26. The case is not cold. The investigation is ongoing. A new piece of evidence has just entered the picture for the first time, sourced not by law enforcement, but by a journalist willing to knock on a door. Sometimes that's how the truth surfaces. Not through official channels, not through press conferences, but through someone deciding to drive 2.5 miles down a side road and look up. Stay subscribed. This story is not over. And when something breaks, you'll hear it here first.